Hi, this is Mike Young with Noble Warriors. You're about to hear a seminar titled Darwin versus Design: Is Intelligent Design an Intelligent Decision? Presented by Joe Thompson, a team member with Noble Warriors in Midlothian, Virginia. This challenge was presented at the Iron Sharpens Iron Men's Conference in Colonial Heights, Virginia on February 19, 2011. My prayer is that this message will encourage you in your walk with Christ and better equip you to lead your family.
Well, good afternoon, guys. We're here today to talk about Darwin versus design, but before we do that, I think I need to do a disclaimer. Today's presentation is going to be brought to you through a lot of efforts of a lot of different people out there, and I really can take no credit for most of the material that's being presented to you today. Many of the images that you're going to see today come from a group called Creation Science Evangelism, but you need to know there's lots and lots and lots of great organizations out there. So let's go ahead and get into this. Why are we here? What's our purpose? Where do we come from? These are some of the important questions that we're all going to ask, and today we're going to try and look at some of the answers. Was it creation? Was it evolution? Or was it maybe some combination of both? And what I mean by that, did God wind it up and let it go? And this is what some people were out there saying, well, maybe God invented the first living cell and then evolution took over from that. So we're going to look at the scientific evidence of what we're being asked to believe anymore. And I know a lot of very intelligent people who believe in evolution. I also know a lot of very intelligent people who haven't really ever given it much thought as to why they believe in evolution. And I think if they were to actually look at the scientific evidence for it, they might be surprised at what they see. The scientific facts are really pretty few and far between. I think evolutionists want you to think that the debate is over, and you're the only moron in the world who still believes in evolution, and I know that's just far, far from the actual truth. Here's a recent headlines from the Washington Times. It says, 55% of U.S. natural scientists believe in Darwinian evolution. I want you to take the slant on this. What it really says is 45% of U.S. natural science don't believe in evolution. If I were to bring 10 scientists in here, natural scientists, and ask, okay, you guys that believe in evolution step over there, and you guys step over here, you wouldn't be able to see much of a difference, right? Because 5 would be over there and 5 would be over here. If we brought 100 in here, there'd be 45 and 55. That's still not enough difference. Science Digest recently reported that scientists who utterly reject evolution may be one of the fastest growing controversial minorities. Many of the scientists supporting this position hold very impressive credentials in science. Today, this is what we're going to look at, why this is happening. I like Dilbert. I don't know if you guys ever watch him, but he's one of my favorite. He always seems to hit the nail on the head. Here's the pointy-headed boss says, wow, you have 3 master's degree and a PhD. The guy asks, yes, it's all very impressive, but interestingly, I have no common sense whatsoever. He says, that's not the kind of thing you should say in an interview, and the guy says, I don't know why not. He doesn't even know why he's saying something stupid. Well, what I want you guys to know today is the truth. So that's what we're going to look for today, the truth, okay? So you don't have to be a PhD to understand what you're going to see here. So what is truth? I think people today will tell you that truth is kind of in the eyes of the beholder. But I propose to show you today that I just don't believe with that. I don't believe that statement at all. And I'll show you that in a minute. But the reality of truth is not up for debate. The truth is true and always will be true. Like it or not, we have no input into it, no control over it, and we never will. Now, let me give you an example. If I were to give you this and ask you what it is, what would you tell me? A banana. How do you know it's a banana? Anything that has that shape, that color, that contour, that texture, that smell is a banana, right? This says kind of, may say seem kind of strange, but we've come to trust in this knowledge that it almost seems silly to us. We believe it implicitly, It's a truth of nature. But what if you opened up the banana? What would you expect to find? A potato? Maybe an orange? No, you expect to find a banana, right? Now that is so simplistic, and you might say it's so obvious that it's silly, but we've come to rely on this thing so heavily that we don't even think about it anymore. That is God. God of nature is God. For instance, if I were to say, God doesn't create gravity on some days and not on other days. He doesn't jerk us around, right? he doesn't have photosynthesis work this day and not tomorrow. We've come to trust that concept so readily that we don't even think about it. So the ultimate source of truth is God himself. And we can use God's truth to understand the fallacies and the shortcomings of evolution. What does the Bible say the reason that Jesus came into the world? To testify to the truth. Jesus said in John 18, "For this reason I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth." Have you ever stopped and thought about how Jesus spoke? Jesus started an awful lot of his sentences with this one thing: I tell you the truth. Right? Do we understand what Jesus is trying to tell us there? Do we get the message? Over 100 times in the gospel, Jesus starts a sentence with, I tell you the truth. But what does man say? If you tell a lie long enough, loud enough, and often enough, the people will believe it. Does anybody know who said that? Adolf Hitler. He also said people are more likely to believe a big lie than a small one. It's interesting. This can be made a little easier to understand by mixing in bits and pieces of truth, the actual truth with it. People get so confused trying to sort out what's truth and what's false that they end up just getting frustrated and they get lost in it. So if you mix in little facts with fiction, you can have them go on for years. The ultimate source of truth is God. Colossians 2:24 says, Christ himself, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge, I say this in order that you know that no one may delude you with persuasive argument. So which one is it? If we look at it, as a believer, we believe that God said in the beginning it was God, and that happened somewhere 6, 7, 8, 10,000 years ago, somewhere in the range, certainly not what the evolutionists would say, in the beginning, nothing. And 20 billion years ago, maybe there was a big bang out there. So let's start at the beginning. But which beginning do we want to start at? Well, evolutionists would have you say, well, Charles Darwin's theory of evolution is where we should start. So let's just see what Charles Darwin has to say about the beginning. What's the one thing Charles Darwin did not talk about in his book, The Origin of Life? That's right. I heard somebody say it. It's the origin of life. Why? It's because he didn't really have a clue. He really did not know. And you need to know evolutionists still have no clue, and they know they don't know. But it's how misleading of a title for a book when you say the origin of life, and it has nothing out there. If we really want to understand evolution, we have to start at the beginning on how life could form from nothing. Evolution is a shell game, and it's got a problem. You may know what that problem is? There's no pea under any of the shells. Most evolutionists think that the evidence is in somebody else's camp. The geologist thinks it's in the chemist, and the chemist thinks it's over in the biologist, and the biologist thinks it's in the anthropologist, and the anthropologist thinks it's astronomer, and on and on and on and on. We've been taught now for decades by some very highly acclaimed scientists that evolution is a fact. It's been taught in our schools now for more than 50 years, and the reason it's taught in our schools is because it's officially sanctioned by the government. But do the facts really support the position? Anybody know who this guy is? Carl Sagan. This is one of evolution's highly acclaimed scientists, and he was kind of the mouthpiece for evolutionists in his time. He's one of those guys that became famous for saying, the Earth and the universe is billions and billions of years old, right? Here's what Carl wrote in his book, The Dragons of Eden. Evolution is a fact amply demonstrated by the fossil record and by the contemporary molecular biology. Anybody notice what Carl just did there? He deferred to somebody else's area for the expertise for the proof of evolution. His area of expertise is astronomy. He's a cosmos guy. He's not into anthropology or molecular biology. Yet, he's out here talking. We don't have time to do it now, but Carl's area of expertise, he's talking about the Big Bang and all this stuff out there. He knows that the evidence is not out there. As a matter of fact, the evidence points just the opposite of that in his area of expertise. So let's just see if what Carl says is true. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know we went back on there. Let's start out with some of the most recent findings in the world of molecular biology, which is DNA. Now, Charles Darwin actually knew nothing about the cell or DNA. It was a complete mystery to him. He thought the cell was like a blob of Jell-O. That might be because he really wasn't ever trained as a scientist. He was trained in theology, is his only background. But Carl Sagan should have known a little something about that. So we don't have a great deal of time to dive into the complexity of DNA. I just want you to know it's the most complex molecule in the universe. I mean, it is so, if we were to write out all the DNA codes of the human body in a book, the number of books that it would take to write out all this code would fill the Grand Canyon. Now, if you've ever been to the Grand Canyon, read a book, toss it over there, and keep throwing books in there until you get through filled. The probability of just one DNA arranging itself by chance has been calculated to be one chance in 10 to the 119,000. That number is so large, I don't think we can grasp it, but let me give you some reference point. The entire visible universe is 10 to the 28 inches in diameter. So DNA formed by chance, that's just not an intelligent statement. An evolutionist want to give us a hard time about intelligent design not being good science. That's not an intelligent statement. Paul Davies wrote, "Nobody knows how a mixture of lifeless chemicals spontaneously organize themselves into the first living cell." Now, Paul Davies is supposedly one of the brightest guys on either side of the ocean. He's now teaching at the University of Arizona in Tucson. Here's another professor up in Canada that says, "You must conclude that no valid scientific explanation of life exists at present. Since science has not the vaguest idea of how life originated on Earth, it would only be honest to admit this to the students, the agencies funding the research, and the public." I like this guy. At least he's honest. He knows if all you need to create life is to get all those chemicals to get a little jolt, you might as well just throw a frog in a blender and turn it on. Really. Now, I know this may seem a little gross, but think about it for a moment. If all that's needed for life to evolve is to have all the right molecules in all the right places at the right time and maybe add a little energy, why not just throw a frog in a blender and turn it on? All the right components got to be there. But what's the difference between that frog in the blender and the one that's hopping around out in your backyard? Well, Genesis 7 tells us all creatures have the breath of life. That's what makes life. It's the breath of life, right? Genesis 2 says, "The Lord God formed of man from the dust of the ground and breathed into the nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being." God made everything. Genesis 1 talks about, "Let us make man in our image and in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and all the creatures that move along the ground." Don't we do that? Don't we do just that? From conception to birth, a human baby adds 15,000 cells per minute to its body. Each cell is more complex than a space shuttle. Here's what the evolutionist would tell you. One only has to contemplate the magnitude of this task to concede that spontaneous generation, that's the life coming to bear out of just chemicals into biological life, spontaneous generation of living organisms is impossible. Yet here we are as a result. I believe in spontaneous generation. Now, if that's not blind faith, I don't know what is, guys. Here's what else he said. "I will not accept the creation philosophy because I do not want to believe in God." Well, that's the bottom line here. Right? He went on to say, "Most modern biologists, having reviewed with satisfaction the downfall of spontaneous generation, yet unwilling to accept the alternative belief in special creation, are left with nothing. I think a scientist has no choice but to approach the origin of life through the hypothesis of spontaneous generation." Is this science or is this religion? I don't know if you guys can see that, but it says, I think you should be more explicit here in step 2 where it says, "Then a miracle occurs." Right? This is what every scientist has to postulate at some point in time. A miracle does occur, and the miracle was God at work. So God created the great creatures of the sea and every living, moving thing in them. It is a miracle, and God's the one who did it. Now the question is, does the Bible talk about this evolution debate? And if you know anything, your Bible talks about everything in life. Do the Scriptures address the evolution debate? Absolutely. Jeremiah 2 says, "Who says to a tree, 'You are my father,' and to a stone, 'You gave me birth'?" James 3 says, "Can a fig tree, my brethren, produce olives? Or a vine produce figs? Neither can salt water produce fresh water." And Psalm 94 says, "He who planted the ear, does he not hear? He who has formed the eye, does he not see?" I think evolutionists would like us to believe that it kind of happens something like this, right? We've got a monkey that takes a little slow evolving. And now, isn't the resemblance remarkable? We're just having a little fun. Don't be sending me letters. National Geographic put this out there. This is the first pioneer. If you believe this is the first pioneer, someone's trying to make a monkey out of you. A conservative estimate suggests that at least 50,000 morphological changes are required to transfer from one species to another. We only have two members, where we start and where we end. The question ought to be, where are the other 49,998 members of the sequence? It's kind of interesting to note there, evolutionists never talk about females, right? Doesn't the female have to evolve at the exact same rate as the male? Because if you don't have a female there, they don't have a species, guys. So not just one of these miracles happen. Another miracle's got to happen at the exact same rate. You guys might have heard of natural selection, or better known as the survival of the fittest. That only the necessary things would survive. Well, natural selection selects from existing options. It cannot select information that's not there. It just cannot generate anything new, right? It can't add wings or add gills or add legs or feet, feathers, hands. It doesn't do that. Actually, evolutionists have now kind of understood that just doesn't work. So they've moved away from what was classically called Darwinist theory, and they really moved now to what's called neo-Darwinism, meaning that it's all caused through mutations. But I will tell you, any mutation that science has ever seen is always inferior to the original cell and never, ever adds anything to it. That's what the actual science shows. But if evolution is true, it seems logical that the more chromosomes an organism has, the further it has evolved. Since penicillin has only 2 chromosomes, it must have evolved first. And then the fruit flies got 8, and then the tomatoes got 12. The tomato's more evolved than the fruit fly? Hey, doesn't the fruit fly have to fly, and tomato just sits there? What's going on? Lettuce is more advanced than a honeybee? I don't know. An opossum, a redwood, and a kidney bean are all the same. Now, maybe this would explain why we got a lot of dead opossums on the highway. I don't know. They're not smarter than a kidney bean. How about there's humans at 46 and tobacco? We're not as advanced. That cigarette you're smoking, I guess. Here's maybe a chicken and a dog are twins. I don't know. A white ash. So that old saying, "You're dumb as a stick," maybe that doesn't mean all that much anymore. If amphibians evolved before mammals, which is what evolutionary theory teaches, why do some amphibians have 5 times more DNA than mammals, and some amoeba have 1,000 times more DNA? I don't know if this is getting where we want to go if you're an evolutionist, but the truth is DNA has led us a few places that the evolutionists would rather not go. And here's a U.S. News and World Report says that virtually all modern men, 99% of them, share genes with one male ancestor dubbed Y chromosome Adam. And it goes back to a very recent one ancestor. Another article says we are all related to a man who lived in Asia in 1415 BC. Everyone in the world is descended from a single person who lived around 3,500 years ago. Really? I'd have never guessed that. His name's Adam. Yes, we have a common ancestor. His name was Adam. Now, the female genes research suggests something very similar. The mitochondrial marker is really a marker for females only. So they can trace females back with this. All right? This says the females have a common ancestor about 300 generations ago, or approximately 6,000 years. Another article said if molecular evolution is really neutral at these sites, such a high mutation rate would indicate that Eve lived about 6,500 years ago, a figure clearly incompatible with current theories on human origins. It's clearly evident to who? It's not incompatible with what I think. I'm thinking, well, that's about right where it's supposed to be. It's only incompatible if you believe that man evolved 3 million years ago. So which timeline is more reasonable based on the scientific evidence? And which one do you believe? Here's Francis Crick. This guy, Francis Crick, was co-discoverer and the Nobel Prize winner for discovering DNA. He says biologists must constantly remind themselves that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. Now, why would they have to tell themselves that? Because it looks like it's designed, guys. You know, I don't have to. Is this one of those brilliant people with a no common sense moment? If it looks designed, you got to keep telling yourself, no, it's not designed, no, it's not designed, no, it's not designed. Carl Sagan's first statement on contemporary biology is not true. Simply not. We'll kind of start the process now to maybe look at the fossil record that he talked about, but I'm going to tell you what. Genesis 1 didn't say that God gave a couple of babies a bag of seeds and some tools and told them to get to work. No, Adam and Eve were fully formed and mature when God created them, and so was the Garden of Eden. And God said it was good. We need to understand how they framed or want to frame the debate. This is, again, an evolution that says time, is in fact the hero of the plot. Given so much time, the impossible becomes possible. The possible, probable, and the probable, virtually certain. One only has to wait until time itself performs the miracles. You see that time is the hero for evolutionists. You must understand this fundamental to all of evolution, that time is the hero in the evolution world. Essentially, nothing can happen without time. So they must guard this most holy secret grail at all costs, okay? Regardless of the logic and whether it's at the expense of common sense or not. Without these massive amounts of time, billions and billions of years, evolution has no hope. And that's why evolutionists will fight, even what seems to be, why would you try to hang up on something so silly as what you're trying to save? So how old is the Earth? If we look at a geological time clock, maybe as a calendar, January 1st would be when the universe and the Earth evolved to where we are today. Man would enter the picture on December 31st at 1250, and that's if he evolved at 3 million years. All right, the evolution of man is really about 100,000 where they're at it. So let's just see how old the Earth is. Evolutionists would tell us that it's about 20 billion years ago when they had a big bang. And in the beginning, nothing. But let's just, for the sake of discussion here, let's assume that we're sunken treasure hunters searching for our fortune of gold, and we finally stumble upon our ship. It's got full of sunken gold, and we want to go what ship we found. So we look at this and we see that, okay, we've got coins in there from 1750, 1710, and 1695. When did the boat sink? Well, from the evidence, logically, we can't necessarily when it did sink, but we can tell you when it did not sink, right? It could not possibly have sunk before 1750, right? Now, that may seem a little simple-minded, but it's vitally important that you understand this fact. And the answer is why. We need to understand this because if just one young Earth hypothesis is true, just one, then the Earth cannot be any older. Textbooks say the Earth is billions of years old, but not always. In 1770, it was only 70,000 years old. In 1905, they grew to 2 billion. In 1969, it was 3.5 billion. And today, this is from a teacher's book. It said, stress that the Earth is thought to be at least 4.5 billion years old. What makes them think that they got it right this time? Science textbooks are being revised every couple of years with each new discovery. In fact, this has been happening ever since they invented the Gutenberg press and could print a science book. How often do they have to rewrite or revise the Bible? They got to remember, the Bible wasn't written as a defense for evolutionary theory, but it's done a pretty good job. It's held up pretty good, pretty remarkably well, all on its own without the help of man. The Bible was the only game in town for centuries, and there were no other theories, and most scientists work from that principle. But where did this theory that the Earth was really old come from? Well, back in the 1830s, a guy named Charles Lyell didn't really care much for the biblical explanation for our being, and he speculated that maybe the Earth was a lot older than the Bible stated. He used the hypothesis of different layers of rock strata for his assumptions here. Now, the theory goes that rock layers are millions of years old and were laid down over very, very long periods of time. From this, it was then theorized that the fossils they contained must be millions of years in different age, and therefore the fossil sorting must represent evolution. So, the scientists then named each one of those layers, and you may recognize Jurassic from the Jurassic Park or Cretaceous or any of these, right? And then after they named them, they assigned them dates. based on the evolutionary theory. Notice that the layers of the Earth were dated using index fossils, then the index fossils were dated by guessing their age based on the theory of evolution. This is not scientific nor valid application of the science. Suggesting a hypothetical age for a fossil based on theory, and then telling everyone that it's an established fact is not the way to apply the scientific method. If you quiz any paleontologist about this, many will assure you that their techniques are indeed scientific. They will tell you that they accurately date the fossil using the date of the rock layer in which they found it. Did you notice what they just did? The rocks do date the fossils, but the fossils date the rocks much more accurately. The strategic cannot avoid this kind of reasoning because the circularity is inherent. We call it something, then we make it a fact. Thomas Jefferson said way back in 1787, the moment a person forms a theory, his imagination sees in every object only the traits which favor that theory. Now, this is Ian Tatterson from the American Museum of Natural History. He says, the patterns we perceive are as likely to result from our unconscious mindset as from the evidence itself. Richard Leakey's son basically admitted as much when he disclosed that the tendency of his famous father, paleontologist Louis Leakey, had to rearrange the fossils in order to their criteria to fit in the line of human descent. So this is this is how evolutionists want you to think of the geological column as it was created so that it fits their evolutionary theory. This is succession of life, all right? This is where they're supposed to fit, all right? Now this whole theory is based on if I'm buried above a teddy bear, the way the theory goes is I descended from a teddy bear. Because the higher up I go, well, the more recent that is. But these folks are continually changing the date of things that they had dated so precisely before because they later find something below that level that was not supposed to be there. And it happens all the time. It's really just a bunch of hocus pocus, guys. But the way evolutionists want you to think about the Earth, the classic example would be the Grand Canyon. Everything's nice and neat, but even here the fossils don't really follow the theory of evolution. They find fossils in all the wrong strata all the time. What would they do with this? How would they go about explaining that? Now, this is a road. This is a West Virginia Turnpike, and I used to travel this road all the time when I went to school at Virginia Tech. But solid rocks don't bend. They break, right? Any kindergartner can tell you that. This rock was soft when it was bent into this configuration. This slide is probably one of the single greatest evidence against evolution's geological column, which is the basis for all of their dating. Okay? Can you bend rocks like this? They tell you that the layers are millions of years old, but yeah, something bent them that way, but they had to be soft, malleable at that point, right? They're saying here, these rock layers are all different ages. That just is not an intelligent statement or conclusion you could come to based on what a kindergartner knows. All these layers had to be soft and malleable at the same time. Obviously, there was some force that bent them into that shape to get them to distort that way, but they couldn't have been laid down millions of years apart and still been soft. Anybody ever seen one of these? It's a little kid's toy. They used to 2 pieces of glass, you stick a little sand in, you turn it upside down, and it all settles out. It's just a child's toy showing the natural layering effect of any sedimentation in a fluid. If I turn this over, this could be the next thing that shows up. It's just a different pattern, right? Now, if you're telling me they're hundreds of millions of years old, do you believe them? I think that's probably based a little more on wishful thinking than it is on actual science. And how would a tree cross multiple eras of rocks, right? One tree crossing, I don't know, a few million years. How'd the trees get there? These are called polystrate trees, and they're found all over the world. They're found in Germany, in France, British Isles, U.S. We've got them everywhere, all right? I'll read this for you. It's really hard. It says, there was a fish that was buried vertically, and its head was in one era of rock, and its tail was in another area of rock, meaning that fish was buried in a couple thousand years difference rock. They're all over the world. Here's a 30-foot petrified tree that the top and the bottom are in different coal seams dated thousands of years different in age. Now, out at Spirit Lake, Wisconsin, there's over 20,000 trees buried there. This is where Mount St. Helens blew back in the 80s. And many of them are buried upright and already in 15 feet of sediment. They seem to be settling out by species. I don't know why they do, but it almost looks like a whole forest out there. So, well, let's talk a little bit about the index fossils that these are supposed to follow. This is called a coelacanth. Now, this was supposed to be one of the transitional figures about from 65 million years ago. If you see these little leg-like things on him, he was the transition from fish to amphibian, where he was going to get out and walk. They called him old forelegs. Well, that worked until they fished one out of the ocean here in the 1930s in the Indian Ocean. He's still alive. And so what's your reaction as an evolutionist? They can't believe that he didn't evolve more in 70 million years. How come he stopped evolving? Not that he wasn't an index fossil to start with. And they don't ever take into something called the Cambrian explosion. Anybody ever heard of the Cambrian explosion? Basically what it says is that every creature alive today is found in 500 million year old rock with all the features that they got today. I mean, fish with all the gills, birds with all the feathers, sharks, tigers, horses, you name it. They're all fully developed and complete with no transitional fossils formed anywhere to explain why. Same strata. But what happens when you find a fossil that doesn't meet or fit into this predetermined model? You see, here's where man is supposed to fit. Okay? Now, today's mouthpiece for evolutionists is probably Richard Dawkins, and he said, if a single well-verified mammal skull were to turn up in a 500 million year old rocks, our whole modern theory of evolution would be utterly destroyed. Hey, he said it, not me. Here's where the humans are, and here's where we found stuff from humans all the way back as far as they can go. Now, how can this be? All right? Here's some of the findings. And you can't read that, but there are skeletons, skulls, footprints, chains, hammers, everything. Let's take a look at some of these things. Is that really hundreds of millions? Here's a human handprint in a crustacean rock dated at 110 million years old. That handprint is so well defined, you can see the fingernails in the fossil. Here's another one with a human hand found down in South America, actual bones in it. Same era. Here's a footprint in crustacean rocks would be over 100 million years old. Now this is interesting because that little blob on the bottom of this sandal is a trilobite. Trilobite is supposed to be thought to be one of the earliest forms of life ever on the planet. Yet here's this, not only human being, he's standing up erect, he's got sandals on. Now how long have we been developed enough to put sandals on our feet? It's just another example of a footprint that should never have been there. Here's a hammer in 400 million year old rock. Here's a silver vessel found in solid rock over 600 million years old, found in Massachusetts. Coal and oil. Textbooks tell us it's supposed to take millions of years for them to form. Here's a cast iron pot found in 1912 in an electric plant in a lump of coal. Here's a bell that was found in a lump of coal in 1944. The guy still has a bell. Isn't coal supposed to be like 230 million years old? Something's not right, guys. In 1996, there was a proposal in Australia to spend about $20 million to create oil from sludge in about 30 minutes. Here's some turkey guts. Now, I used to work in the poultry industry. I can appreciate this. They were going to turn turkey guts into 4 billion barrels of light Texas crude every year. 600. Here's what the plant manager said, or the president of the company said, we duplicate what Mother Nature does, but what Mother Nature takes millions of years to do, we do in about 30 minutes. Now, don't we make diamonds today? I mean, they tell you it takes billions of years to make diamonds or millions of years to make diamonds. Don't we make artificial diamonds? Did anybody ever use the diamond cut tip saw? Here's a petrification, and it takes millions of years. Here's a piece of chopped wood, petrified. Here's a cowboy boot with a foot still in it, petrified. All right? Well, that boot says 1950s on it. Here's a petrified pickle, and there's peanuts, and there's teddy bears, everything out there. Here's my wife and I were at Carlsbad Cabins on our honeymoon, and they told us it takes millions and millions of years to create these things. Stalactites might grow a 32nd of an inch every 1,000 years. Anybody been to the Lincoln Memorial? Go down in the basement. It was built in 1922. There's a 50-inch stalactite down there. It was built in 40 years. TP Fountain out in Wyoming, that's it. about 90 years, it's 25 feet high. That guy standing there is 6'1". At the current rate of erosion, the continents would erode flat in 14 million years. How could we have rocks that are 300 times older than that and still be above sea level? The amount of sediment in the ocean is just not there to support that. Here, at the Gulf of Mexico, there's 80,000 tons an hour of sediment coming through the Mississippi out through New Orleans every day. There's not enough sediment in the Gulf of Mexico to warrant that much time. There's a 60-foot, there's a guy who was working on a drilling rig in the Gulf, said they drilled through a 60-foot tree for almost at 14,000 feet below surface of the water. What's a 60-foot tree going down 14,000 feet under the water? Maybe a flood. Niagara Falls. I mean, it's a beautiful place. I used to live not too far from that. But Niagara Falls is like every other falls. It erodes backward. Okay? So water comes over, it pushes the falls backward, and you can measure that. Here's what the Niagara Falls looked like in 1764 and 1819. We know exactly where the falls was. Guys were out there measured. Walked across it, right? It erodes at about 4, maybe 5 feet a year. Well, if the Earth's millions of years old, why is Niagara Falls only eroded 8 miles? It's less than 10,000 years old. The ocean salinity, 3.6. It could have gone from fresh to 3.6 in less than 5,000 years. The Great Barrier Reef off of Australia was very badly damaged during World War II. Bombs dropping, ships sinking, planes crashing into it. The Australian government took a study and studied it for 20 years to see the growth rate. You know what they determined how old it was? 4,200 years. Isn't that interesting? Oldest trees, 4,300 years. Oldest languages. You study them. World Book Encyclopedia says the first developed systems of word writing appeared only about 5,000 years ago. The oldest language that can reasonably be reconstructed is already modern, sophisticated, and complete from an evolutionary standpoint. Isn't it interesting that the oldest evidence of writing that we have had a hard start and it didn't evolve? Shouldn't it have evolved as we were evolving with it? Why are the oldest reliable historical written records less than 6,000 years old? Anybody got a theory? I got one. The Chinese language is kind of interesting because it's all pictures. And if you want to see, let's take a look for creation. What the word in Chinese for creation is: dust plus breath of life plus from God's mouth plus motion equals creation. How about ship? Vessel plus 8 plus mouth equals ship. Didn't Noah have like 8 people on his ship? And why do they call that ship? The year 2000 was 4,700 on the Chinese calendar. Maybe they started with the birth of Shem and Noah. The year 2000 was 5760 on the Hebrew calendar. They intentionally left out a few things because they didn't want it to point to Jesus. They wanted it to report to or direct it to Simon Bar Kokhba. Saxons in England have a genealogy that goes back to Adam. The Danes and Norwegians go back to Noah. They have genealogy for that. This is a newspaper headline from Minneapolis, Minnesota, 1999. Last week's population topped 6 billion. Well, it's interesting. If you take the population we have today and work it backward at the date at the growth rates we have today, the result would be a handful of people alive about 4,500 years ago. Interesting that that's just about the time Noah's flood was supposed to have happened. But if you take it the other way, on the other hand, if we take, let's say, a monkey stood up with his wife and we called them people a million years ago, and they started growing at the same rate that they grow today, we should have about, well, I can't even figure what that number is, 10 followed by 43 zeros. The evolutionists know this, all right? So what do you do if you're an evolutionist? You create a catastrophe, right? Based on the DNA studies, scientists are now putting forth the theory that there was a catastrophe 70,000 years ago that reduced the human population to a few thousand. That's the bottleneck they needed. And this catastrophe would have made Mount St. Helens over here look like a pop gun. All right? Anybody ever hear of Noah's flood? That's a track of the population, guys. Now, why do evolutionists choose to ignore the obvious answer and make up one of their own? Why do they got to go just make up a catastrophe when one's already written about. And that catastrophe was a flood. Now, it's interesting. There are over 270 flood stories around the world. Think about that a while. Why would that be? Right? This fact alone, with nothing to support it, should give us a little reason to pause. Why would so many ancient tribes on different continents with different languages, why would they all have the same kind of story? Here's one from Hawaii. Kinahana, the first man, the world became a wicked, terrible place to live. Then there was one good man left. His name was Nu'u. He made a great canoe with a house on it and filled it with animals. The water came up over all the earth and killed all the people. Only Nu'u and his family were saved. Here's in China, called Fuhi. He's the first man. He's the father of civilization. It says Fuhi, his wife, three sons and three daughters escaped the great flood. He and his family were the only people to live, and they started repopulating the world. Here's down in Mexico, the Toltec Indians. The first world that lasted 1,716 years was destroyed by a giant flood. A closed chest, like an ark. Men began to get there, and we follow this through 520 years. I actually have been in this town. We used to have a manufacturing plant when I was at Abbott in Tlalpan. But it says the Toltec Indians said the first world lasted 1,716 years and was destroyed by a great flood that covered the highest mountains. Only one guy survived. His name was Kakaks. Well, the Bible dates put the flood 1,656 years after creation. The Toltec legend's only 60 years off after 4,000 years. We've got archaeological evidence out of there. Most of you guys have probably heard of Gilgamesh, and that's an actual cuneiform tablet that has the story of Gilgamesh on it. There's lots of geological evidence for a global flood, and we're not going to go through all those necessarily, but we've got sediment everywhere, rapid erosion, etc. Clams open when they die. Anybody that's ever walked on the beach probably knows that clams open when they die, right? Then why are there tens of feet thick on the mountaintops all over the world, thick of unopened clams? 30 feet thick, solid clams unopened on the highest mountains around the world. Here's an example of some of the clams, or some of these things that hadn't opened, from the mountaintops around the globe. All the continents of our planet are covered from coast to coast with millions of ocean, plant, insect, etc., animals. And why would that be? Here's an oyster, 11.5 feet tall, closed, over 2 miles above sea level. How did it get there? There are massive graveyards have been found all over the world on every continent. There's some here in Britain, some over in Australia, in the United States. There are fossils fields with almost 1 trillion fossils in them. Why would that be? Did all these animals know where they were supposed to go and die? Right? This is the happy hunting ground. We go over here and we die. Millions, billions, and almost 1 trillion of them in the same fossil. What does that say, guys? I just don't think that's what's more reasonable, right? This is how fossils are supposed to form. This is what scientists would like you to believe, or evolution would like you to believe how a fossil forms. The dinosaur dies, he falls to the bottom of the lake, he gets covered over, he turns into a fossil, and then eventually it erodes away and comes back. Does that happen anywhere in the world today? If a deer died in the woods, would he sit there long enough to have dirt come over him? And no, there's a wild animal who's going to come and grab them. It just doesn't happen, guys. All right? What we have is evidence of burial so rapid that the soft flesh details are still preserved. Here's a fish with fins and eye sockets still intact. Here's a jellyfish. By the way, jellyfish don't have bones. There's nothing there to fossilize. Right? Here's one of those trilobites. Compound lens of the eye are still so detailed in this thing, you can see the details of it. Some of these things got caught in the act. Here's a fish eating another fish, right in the middle of a meal. Here's one giving birth. See down off this little chute. The fossils are not as well sorted as the textbooks want you to believe. All right? One of the ironies of evolution creation debate is that creationists have accepted the mistaken notion that the fossil record shows a detailed and orderly progression, and they have gone to great lengths to accommodate this fact in their flood geology. We creationists, guys, are just as guilty to fall in line with some of these latest findings until we really validate what the finding was about. So why are animals sorted or fossils sorted into layers? Well, there's really 3 or 4 reasons. Their mobility, their habitat, intelligence, and body density. This is how they have a tendency to sort out. But scientists have demonstrated that by burying a bird, a mammal, a reptile, and an amphibian in some muddy water during the liquefaction process, they sort into that exact order. They sort bottom up. So the Grand Canyon, that people like to talk about, is really better evidence for a flood than erosion. And the snow line is what tells the story. The Grand Canyon is really a breach. Okay, you see where the snow is? Where does snow fall? This is a satellite photograph. Snow falls in the mountains. Those high spots where the snow is are over 6,000 to 7,000 feet in the air. All right. The river enters. Colorado River enters about 2,800 feet, flows about 270 miles, and exits at 1,800 feet. Well, I don't know. The last time I figured that out, that's looking at it in a profile. Water doesn't flow uphill on its own. Now, you can verify this for yourself if you'd like. Go to Google Maps, key in the Grand Canyon, and over on the thing, there's a topographical button on there. Click that on, and you'll see where the top of the north and south rim, what the elevation is, and where the river comes into the state of Arizona. Now, if it didn't happen that way by slow erosion, how did it happen? Well, if you build a dam across the mouth of the Colorado River right there at that border, there would be 2 massive bodies of water above it that would encompass 4 different states, about the size of the Great Lakes. The erosion from this sudden release of water would cause massive amounts of erosion. The question is there any evidence of this? And the answer might surprise you. We have actually seen this type of massive erosion on 2 different occasions, well, on a number of occasions, but actually 2 of them that I'm going to show you. One of them occurred right on the Colorado River, right about where that dam is, where you see that point. It's called the Glen Canyon Dam, and one at St. Helens. This is the Glen Canyon Dam. When it was first built, these little water chutes that are coming out the side, this is how they get rid of water when the water levels get too high. Well, when they first turned those on, they heard a tremendous rumbling, and the guys knew something must be wrong. They shut them down. Well, this is what happened in about 20 seconds when that was going on. This cavitation, that's solid rock, guys. 30 feet of solid rock was eroded in about 20 seconds. Sorry about that. I'll go back. Mount St. Helens, when Mount St. Helens blew trees, dust, and debris, everything, clogged up all the streams. And when those things backed up, the water kept flowing and kept flowing until they burst the dam. In a matter of minutes, they cut this gorge. That's 150 feet, cliffs, in a matter of minutes. Not millions of years or billions of years or even hundreds of years, a matter of minutes. Was Bryce Canyon in Utah carved over millions of years? Well, that's millions of years of erosion along a highway that was built a couple months ago. How about radiometric dating? This is something everybody likes, carbon-14 dating. We're going to try and do a little quick discussion on here. You see how close carbon and nitrogen are together there? If we could just bump a little proton, dislodge a proton from the nitrogen nucleus, we could generate carbon-14. And that's what happens as cosmic rays kind of bounce into our atmosphere. They knock a few of these things out. All right, when radiation from the sun strikes the nitrogen atom in the Earth's upper atmosphere, it produces a radioactive carbon-14, which then combines, and this is what we're looking for, right? This is how it happens. The Earth's atmosphere is about 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and 0.06% carbon dioxide, which has some of this radioactive carbon in it, okay? During photosynthesis, plants breathe in this CO2, right? Take it in as part of the tissue, and then animals eat the plants and make it part of their bodies. When the plant or animal dies, it stops taking in the CO2 with some of this carbon-14 molecules in it. All right? So whatever C14 it has in its body, it still continues to decay. Half a C14 decays every 5,700 years. So since it cannot gain any more, since it's dead or it's not taking in anymore, it goes out of balance. And then we can measure, okay, how much is in there as to how old it is. That's the premise. But the key assumption for carbon dating work, is the amount of C14 in the atmosphere has always been the same. It's in equilibrium. Now what this means is if you've ever seen a barrel of water and you're filling it with water but you drill a couple holes in it, what you're really looking is, when does that thing get to equilibrium? If more water's coming in that's going out, it's slowly raising. You got to have equilibrium in here before you can start knowing anything about what's going on in there. Okay? Well, it's been calculated that it will take about 30,000 years for Earth's atmosphere to reach equilibrium. Now, well, we know the Earth's millions of years old, so we can ignore this problem, right? The equilibrium issue. And the answer is, it hasn't reached equilibrium yet. Radioactive carbon is forming at 28 to 37% faster than it's decaying. Well, without this steady state equilibrium, all bets are off. Nothing can make any sense. And here's what happens. The lower leg of a woolly mammoth was dated at 15,000 radiocarbon years, while the skin and flesh were rated at 21,000 years. And this was back in 1949 when the technology first kind of came out. A living moss was dated 2,300 years old when it was still alive. Well, this was in 1963. A freshly killed seal was carbon dated at 1,300 years. Well, that's 1971. We're not getting any better of a problem. Here's what some scientists said. If a C14 date supports our theories, we put it in the main text. If it doesn't entirely contradict them, we put it in a footnote. And if it's just completely out of date, we just drop it. Now, completely out of date with what? With your beliefs and your pre-imposed supposition? A couple of Russian scientists dated dinosaur bones at 30,000 years. A scientist in Ohio dated some dinosaur bones at 20,000 years. Well, wait a minute, that doesn't seem to be, that's way too, how does that happen? Well, the samples weren't identified as dinosaur bones in advance. No matter how useful it is, though, the radiocarbon method is still not capable of yielding accurate and reliable results. There are gross discrepancies, and the chronology is uneven and relative, and the accepted dates are actually selected dates. This whole blessed thing is nothing but 13th century alchemy, and it all depends on which funny paper you're reading. The trouble of radiocarbon dating are serious and deep. And we can't fix it as we go. It says allowing for contamination here, fractionation there, and calibration wherever possible. It should be no surprise then that fully half the dates are rejected. The wonder is surely that the remaining half have come to be accepted. We talked a little bit about how this works. We start with a certain amount, and as you get further down this curve, it kind of disappears, right? There should be no carbon-14 atoms in anything that's older than 250,000 years. It should just have kind of disappeared at that point. Yet it's proven impossible to find any natural source of carbon below the Pleistocene age, which is our ice age, that does not contain significant amounts of C14. How can that be? The Pleistocene age is way, way up at the top. But we're finding C14 in 400-million-year-old rock. Earth's magnetic field has declined 10% in the last 150 years and 40% in the last 1,000 years. The Earth's magnetic field is getting weaker. That's pretty obvious. It cannot be billions of years old then. 25,000 is the maximum the Earth could be based on what we see in the magnetic field, and carbon dating can't work. Here's an interesting thing to consider. If you have a known sample, you know the age of it, radioisotopic dating doesn't work. But if it's unknown, well, then it assumes that it does work. What about potassium-argon dating? This is another one. The only difference here is that the half-life of potassium-argon is 1.3 billion years. Okay? Well, so we're going to date things like volcanoes and eruptions like that. Here are all these volcanoes on the left, 49, 54, 54, 75. The dates on the right, what they're dated at is 270,000, 1.2 million. All right, moon rocks brought back from the Apollo missions range from 2.5 billion to 4.6. Well, that's almost 100% error, guys. Now, scientists don't generally think that's a good number, like 100% error. They like to keep that 1 or 2%. All right. Here's the chief of NASA's operation to talk about the Genesis rock that was brought. He said it was found to be 10,000 years to several billion years, depending on who was dating it, and that's in the same rock. Now, here's an eruption from Mount Etna in Sicily in 122 BC, was dated 250,000. Here's one from Hawaii in 1801, was 1.6 million. Mount Kilauea in 1959, 8.5 million years. 1964, 700,000. This is not looking so good. The new lava dome growing inside the crater at Mount St. Helens was just dated at 2.4 million years. For crying out loud, guys, that was 30 years ago. I remember watching that. Most of you guys saw that, right? I mean, this isn't looking real good, Well, here's what they had to say. In conventional interpretation of potassium argon age data, it's common to discard ages which are substantially too high or too low compared with the rest of the group or with the other available data such as the geological column. Aha, it all comes back to the geological column, guys. To see how invasive this assumption is, it just creeps into everything. They assume evolution and it just creeps into everything. It's so pervasive, it's so ingrained that they just don't realize how it's contaminated the science it's at, that it works with. Is that science, is all I'm saying. Radiocarbon dating would never have been feasible if the geological column had not been erected first. Ever since William Smith at the beginning of the 19th century, fossils have been and still are the best and most accurate method of dating. Oh, we're back to the rocks date the fossils and the fossils date the rocks, guys. The bottom line is, that's the bottom line. No matter what technology is brought to bear, the final decision maker is still where it is in the rock. Scientific evidence shows that evolutionists are wrong about the age of the Earth, guys. That's just the bottom line. So what is the evidence for evolution? I don't know. I've searched. I can't find it. So let's look. Let's see what we can find in the missing link. Are we there yet? The never-ending search for the missing link. It's kind of interesting. When those fish crawled out of the water, were they breathing air or are they still gills? I never could keep that straight, but never mind. The missing link. Anthony Stanton said, it's the most misleading phrase because it suggests that only one link is missing. It would be more accurate to say that the greater part of the chain is missing, so much that not entirely certain whether there's a chain at all. Now here's what Brother Darwin, Charles Darwin, said: the number of intermediate varieties, meaning missing links, that formerly existed on the Earth must have been truly enormous. Why then can't we find any of them? Geology sure does it. This is the best, most obvious and gravest objection which can be urged against my theory. Well, don't worry, Chuck, there's many other grave objections to your theory. This is just one of them. So his suggestion is, the solution to this is, well, the geological record is extremely imperfect. We don't have that many fossils. So that must explain why we don't have them. But if we can't find them, then you'll rightly reject my entire theory. Well, what's a fossil tell us? I may be dead, but I can sure tell you everything you need to know. What can a fossil bone tell us? Who its children are? No. What its spouse looked like? No. What it ate for lunch? No. When it died? No. Where it died? No. How it died? No. That it's dead? Yes. That's all it can tell us. Okay? If you find a fossil in the dirt, you don't know if it had any kids. You certainly don't know if it produced different kind of kids. All you really know is it's dead. So why do evolutionists think that that claim that bones can tell us something that living animals can't, that it produced different kinds? A fossil certainly is not valid evidence in a court of law the way that we know the law today. So here's an example of Nebraska Man. This is in the Illustrated London News in 1922. Nebraska Man was scientifically rebuilt from one tooth. That's all the evidence they had was one tooth. Now, the greatest jigsaw puzzles in the world that I know of can't make that kind of conclusion, right? But that's this recreation, this reconstruction. If you take bones, here's some examples of what it should have looked like and what it looked like in reality. Look at the very bottom skeleton with that interesting head bump. That's what you'd think it maybe should look like. That's what it actually looked like, okay? Any of these recreations, it's just the artist's imagination, guys. You took one skull, and I can recreate it however I want it to look, right? Here, they gave a skull to 9 different artists, and I got 9 different compositions of what that skull looked like when it had flesh on it. The bones just don't tell you that much. This is not like bones on television, guys. We're just not that good. Here's an example. National Geographic gave 7 incomplete bones. You count the bones over there, and this is what they came up with, right? 4 different artists came up with all those things. Now, how did they know this? Well, the candidates were told the bones were from a female. Now, how they knew this, I don't know. It's a mystery to me how you know. You look at bones and tell that's how much bones you had. You know it was a female. You know? So, I want to talk a little bit about evolutionary's Hall of Shame. And it's sad, but evolution have a long and sordid past when it comes to providing the truth. So, intentional frauds, this list is long and growing. We aren't going to have time to go through all of these, but I want to touch on some of them. Here's Ernst Haeckel. He said his turning point in his thinking was when he read Charles Darwin's book. All right? Haeckel's embryos. You guys may have heard about this when you were growing up, maybe when you went to school. This was shown, he was trying to show that all these embryos were the same from salamanders and fish and dogs and cats and humans and everything else, all right? This was actually disproved within 5 years of him doing it. Haeckel's drawings are on the top. The actual photos of what those embryos look like is on the bottom. I mean, he increased some head sizes, decreased others. He changed the eye sockets, posterior lanes, made them all look alike, all right? Now, when he was convicted in court, he said, yeah, a small percentage of my embryo drawings were forgeries, right? He had to fill in. He was just trying to fill in what wasn't there, didn't have evidence for. But here's one of the things. I should feel utterly condemned were it not that hundreds of the best observers and biologists lie under the same charge. That's a pretty damning statement for all the evolutionists of his time. All right? Nebraska man. What he really is, this is the real Nebraska man. That tooth was an extinct pig's tooth. All right? Now, we're always finding here, Darwin's theory is proved. This is the New York Times, dated 1912. Darwin's theory is proved. This is Piltdown Man. Now, Piltdown Man is interesting because what they found on him was a jawbone, 2 molar teeth, and a piece of a skull. Okay? It made all the newspapers. It was some of the expert evidence used in the Scopes monkey trial, but there was one problem. It was a fraud, intentional fraud. The jaw was from an ape, was only 50 years old. The teeth had been filed down to disguise the original shape, and then they were artificially colored. Now, a guy actually won. He was knighted by the King of England for this discovery. The King of England knighted the guy, one of the guys that had made this discovery. Lucy, we've all heard of her about her. She was found in 1974. I remember this. Now, there's the skull that they'll tell you Lucy has. Now, I don't know how they get to that skull from that amount of bones, but you'll notice something else. I mean, there's no hands and no feet bones, all right? Now, in a St. Louis zoo, Lucy's on display with hands and feet, but there weren't any found. Now, this is a transition. You've got to remember, this was supposed to be one of the transitional fossils found. The purpose of the display is not for education, but indoctrination, because a University of Washington professor said, the statue is a complete misrepresentation, and I believe they know it is a misrepresentation. Here's the response. Zoo officials have no plans to knuckle under. I put that in quotes, because she was a knuckle walker. We cannot be updating every exhibit based on every new piece of evidence. We look at the overall exhibit and the impression it creates. We think the overall impression this exhibit creates is correct. Means we're not really interested in the truth. We just want to create an impression out there. Laetoli footprints. The form of this foot was exactly the same as ours. Man, imagine that. If the footprints were not known to be so old, we would really readily conclude that they were made by a member of our own genus. But when it came out in National Geographic, look at the footprint down here. Toe separation. That's because that's what apes have, monkeys have, right? How about Neanderthal man? A man was a hunchback, right? He had rickets as a child and arthritis as an adult. Is that Neanderthal man today? Is he still around? Here's an Aborigine and a European and an Indian, a Flathead Indian. Tell me that you got something more than an increased brow thickness and a stooped-over nature that makes this man the missing link. What would you do with this guy? We got all kinds of these diseases today that cannot be explained, and we come in all different shapes and sizes, guys. Now, that doesn't mean that we're a missing link or any of these guys are a missing link. People need Jesus. Interesting, a German professor, a world-renowned German professor, was recently brought up on fraud charges. This is in 2005. I remember hearing about this in the papers. Systematically falsified dates on numerous Stone Age fossils, including the skull fragment dubbed Hanhofsterman, that allegedly linked humans with Neanderthals. Now, the commission finds that Professor Potts forged and manipulated scientific facts for over 30 years. The university said of the widely recognized expert in carbon dating, no less. Oh. A 3,300-year-old female was really only 3,300. He had her at 21,000. Another dating error, 27,000. What he had to date was a man who died in 1750. Is he contrite? Not really. He said, he says, we are having to rewrite prehistory because of this guy's frauds. All right? They based so much on this. Anthropology now has to revise its picture of modern man between 40,000 and 10,000 BC. This is all a result of what his work was. Now, the university president went out and apologized to the public, and what they said, a lot of people looked the other way. I think that's the problem we've got in a lot of things. Now, horse evolution is one of the things that evolutionists like to use. This is actually out of a Chinese school book. The evolution of the horse is always regarded as the best evidence, you know. Here's one out of an Irish textbook, and it's, what's it based on that this is the evolution of the horse? What evidence do they got? This says the evolution of the horse was unintentionally falsified. Sorry, guys, we didn't really mean to do this. This is 1950. We knew it was unintentionally falsified. It was all wrong. This is 1951. A year later, we're still talking about it. It never happened in nature. Oh, that's 1953. The much repeated gradual evolution of the horse. Oh, wait a minute, this is 1992. We're still talking about it 40 years later. This horse evolution is still on display. This is at one of the most prestigious colleges in the country. This is at Yale University. It was proven wrong over half a century ago. It's still on display at Yale University. Let me control the textbooks, and I will control the people. Why is it still in our textbooks? We now have discovered over 1 trillion fossils. We are now 120 years after Darwin, and the knowledge of fossil record has been greatly expanded. We have now had 250,000 fossil species, but the situation hasn't changed much. The record of evolution is still surprisingly jerky, and ironically, we have even fewer examples of the evolutionary transition than we had during Darwin's time. This guy is on the Field Museum of Natural History. This is not a pastor at a church. I will lay it on the line. There is not one such transitional fossil for which I could make a watertight argument. This is the chief evolution paleontologist at the London Museum of History. Archaeopteryx. A lot of people like to make that the transitional dinosaur. Paleontologists have tried to turn Archaeopteryx into an earthbound feather dinosaur, but it's not. It's a bird, a perching bird, and no amount of paleobabble is going to change that. This is now what was the mouthpiece for evolution, is Stephen Gould saying, it's a trade secret. We don't know what the heck happened. There are no transitional forms out there. Those things that adorn our textbooks, it's really a fabrication. The rest is just inference. That's the fossil record cannot be regarded as anything other than hostile witness against evolution, guys. It's more a tribute to extinction than evolution. The theory is supposed to deliver new and varied species. Where's the evidence of this? If evolution is true, why aren't there millions of new species being generated? 99% of all species are now extinct. If evolution is true, why aren't we constantly evolving, and where are the new species? We really need to ponder this for some time. You need to think about this. If evolution is true and we're generating new species all the time, where are they? The evolutionists don't argue that 99% of the species that have ever lived in the earth are now extinct. So, Carl, your second guess, that's not true either. Evolution is untrue and unprovable. We believe it only because the only alternative is special creation, and that's unthinkable. That's the reality, guys. Is that science? I don't think so. Evolution is not a fact and doesn't even qualify as a good theory. This is a guy that used to be an evolutionist. So where do the dinosaurs fit in? This is what everybody kind of likes, dinosaurs. I mean, I just want you to, here's humans way up at the top, and now here's the dinosaurs, kind of here about 250 to 65 million years ago. Try to keep this in mind as we go along, that, you know, dinosaur means terrible great lizard. Out of a textbook it said, like all reptiles, it grows throughout its life. Is it possible that a dinosaur is just a reptile that's been growing for a really long time? The Bible says that man lived for 900 years prior to the flood. What if dinosaurs or other animals lived for hundreds and hundreds of years? Are these possible new Tyrannosaurus rexes? The dinosaur is not even in the Bible or in the dictionary in 1891. It's still not there. Wasn't invented yet. As a matter of fact, dinosaurs are mentioned throughout all of history, but the name has changed. They used to be called dragons, serpents, leviathans, behemoths. Since the term dinosaur was not invented until a couple of thousand years after the Bible, your translation probably does not list it in the concordance. But if you find an earlier Bible in the 19th century or older, you'll find that dragons are mentioned 34 times. Dragons are actually mentioned in Jeremiah, Micah, Malachi, Isaiah, Psalms, Deuteronomy. If you look up dragon in the dictionary, it says now rare. Interesting. Now rare. That's the number one definition there. The wine is the poison of dragons in Deuteronomy 32. Out of his mouth, the Leviathan, go burning lamps and sparks of fire leap out. Job 41. Behold now behemoth. Job 40. If you look at behemoth in your Bible, it probably says something like elephant or hippopotamus. That's ludicrous, guys, and I'm going to show you why. The strength is in his loins, all right, in his belly. Well, elephants have a big belly, I'll grant you that, and a hippopotamus has a big belly, and a dinosaur has a big belly. He has a big belly. He's got one too, but I wouldn't call him a dinosaur. All right? He moved his tail like a cedar. Now, here's a picture of cedar trees. I have a friend from Lebanon. These are the biblical cedars in Lebanon. All right? This is what helped Solomon build his temple out of, those cedar trees. That's what we're talking about. Well, no, doesn't kind of make it there. Not a cedar tree here either. Now, that's more like a cedar tree, guys. His bones are as strong as pieces of brass and bars of iron. Here's a Bronchiosaurus toe bone. This is the leg that goes with that toe bone. Now this guy fits the bill for Job 40. It's the largest dinosaur ever found. All right, it can be 100 tons. If you read the whole verse, it talks about muscles in his belly. He bends his tail like a cedar. His bones are tubes of bronze. First, the ways of God. If a river rages, he's not alarmed. Can anyone capture him? Hey, does this sound like an elephant or a hippopotamus to you? Or is it better for a Bronchiosaurus or a Sauroposeidon? If your Bible has footnotes like this, remember it's the Bible text that's inspired, not the footnotes. Now, National Geographic said no human being has ever seen a live dinosaur. Well, does the evidence support this statement? In 900 AD, an Irish writer said an animal with iron nails on its back and its tail. They match pretty well with a couple of dinosaurs that we know. Stegosaurus, a little over 1,000. There are thousands of legends of people seeing and killing dragons. Alexander the Great talked about great dragons that his troops were afraid of, and they lived in caves. Here's a long-necked creature found on an Egyptian husk in the 12th century B.C. Here's one on a Greek slate. The famous Greek historian Herodotus, he talks about of a winged serpent, not feathered, resembling close to that of a bat. Here is a scroll, a seal that they rolled against wax to seal documents. A Babylonian cylinder seal. You can read more about that in After the Flood. Here are the entrance gates to the ancient city of Babylon. Okay, notice the inlaid labels. This is a close-up of one of those images. A dragon image. Here's a recent photo of a U.S. soldier in Iraq. What's the dragon images on the inlaid on the wall behind him? Pre-Inca Indians riding a dinosaur. This is one of the Ica stones. There's 11,000 of these stones. And I want to show you some of them, what they look like. This is a carvings done. Tyrannosaurus rex. Pretty close looking there, isn't it? Triceratops. How about a little fight going on between T-Rex and another Triceratops just watching? These little circles on her skin. They couldn't figure out what the circle patterns were on the skin until they made a discovery in Bolivia a little while ago that dinosaur skin had the little round non-fossilized dinosaur skin was found down in South America. They also carved little figurines in the shape of dinosaurs. All right, 3 to 6 inches long. We got bunches of them they found in a pit. Over 50,000 similar ceramic figurines were found in Quiramboro, Mexico. Here's an Inca mummy, or an Ica mummy. Look at the textile on her. She's wearing on her. It's a little close-up of it. Another piece that she had. Here's a pottery. It doesn't look like a camel to me. I don't know what it is, but here's a Cambodian temple inlay here. Get a little closer look at that. That sure looks like a Stegosaurus to me. This is in the Utah canyons. It's a little harder to see, but I think you can kind of grasp it. Why would people from different parts of the world and different cultures and different backgrounds draw pictures and carved images of animals they'd never seen? Is that reasonable? Is that logical? I think if you were to really see one of these guys up close and personal, I'm sure he'd make a very deep impression on you. Here's a Viking woodcut of a dragon swallowing a man. How about Viking ship? Or After the Flood. Here's a Roman-era sword with an engraved dinosaur on it. Now, here's the actual sword. It's a little hard to see down here in the lower right, but you can kind of get a drift of what was shown earlier. Here's a coin from 1609 showing a man slaying a dragon. Here's a coin from 1606 showing a man slaying a dragon. Here's a coin from 1622 showing 1600s. The early 1600s must have been a pretty popular thing to do, was to slay dragons. Here's a Russian medallion or a Bulgarian postage stamp. How about the crest of Lithuania? I like that one. Why would the Chinese have 11 real animals and one mythical dragon? Well, in 1271, Marco Polo reported that on special occasions, dragons pulled the royal chariot. As a matter of fact, in 1611, the emperor appointed a post of royal dragon feeder. I suppose it was because they had a royal dragon to be fed. Chinese families, books even tell of Chinese families raising dragons to use their blood for medicines and highly prized eggs. There's evidence of humans and dinosaurs living together in Russia, Brazil, Peru, Texas. Footprints have been found in Turkmenistan, Arizona, and Texas. Here's what's called the Taylor Trail. You can see the humans walking this way, dinosaur walking that way. Here's a close-up of it. A little closer you can see the human footprint there. They actually cut a block out of this, put it in the American Museum. I don't think it's there anymore. Here's a human track inside a dinosaur track. You get a little closer. It's still hard to see, but you can kind of see the toe inside the track. Now this is kind of a close-up, and I like this one probably best because they did some CAT scans and some other things to show that human footprint, the dinosaur had stepped first, human second. All right. They did the CAT scan because they wanted to see what was beneath the imprint to know that it wasn't carved out of there artificially. What are we supposed to do with all the conflicting information with evolution? I mean, should we join the debate? Evolutionists would say absolutely not. What's a reasonable man to do? Well, here's what the creationists say. Creationists are stupid, lying people who have never been trusted or not to be trusted in any way. All their points are equally stupid except where the creation are outright lying. Here's another one that says, anyone holding a creationist viewpoint must be illogical, backward, subversive, uneducated, and stubborn. I'll grant them the stubborn part. I am fairly bullheaded. Here's another one that says, any student who should fail a class no matter what the grade level is, if his grades and possibly even degrees, passing the course, if he has these, espouses creationism. All right? Another guy says, grades or degrees of university students who hold special creation concept after having taken science courses should be retracted. In other words, flunk them retroactively, if necessary. If you're hiring teachers, they demonstrate incompetence if they have this scientific creationist. By the very self-designation, they're incompetent. Here's another guy who said, creationists should be discriminated against. No advocate of such propaganda should be trusted to teach science classes or administer science programs. Moreover, if any are now doing so, they should be dismissed. Right? One guy says, I'm aghast that they fired a guy because he had creation policies. A teacher had much of a grasp on reality. There's no point in reviewing both sides. Creationism is a leftover from very primitive folklore. It's real, guys. These people are too far removed from reality to be able to direct young people along objective paths. They have an inability to define reality. All right? We need to separate them out of the schools, and it's a job of professional society. Here's a Christian that says, unless the Christian community becomes involved in the struggle for religious freedom and does so quickly, those that are being born today will physically be persecuted if they desire to practice their Christian faith. I fully understand how radical this statement sounds, but it's an intellectually honest statement, not one to shock. Is this science or just outright bigotry? If evolution is true, why all the lies and why the need for intentional deception? We don't even talk about the spirit of man, why he composes poetry or writes novels or music and art, all right? And why all the vicious attacks? The only game in town for centuries was the creation story. Atheists didn't like that story, so they made up their own. To the evolution, knowledge is king. Science is the ultimate pursuit of power, but the Bible says in 2 Timothy, they're always learning but never able to acknowledge the truth. See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy based on the principles of this world.
I trust that through this presentation you've been challenged and motivated to take bold steps of faith to advance the kingdom. We are thankful for the help and support we've received on these recordings from Morris Audio Consulting. Visit them on the web at morrisaudioconsulting.com. We also hope you'll take time to learn more about Noble Warriors and the Iron Sharpens Iron Conference Network by visiting noblewarriors.org. God bless you, friend.